in the past couple of years. Hopefully next year we will be able to do one live in person, but today we get to be live streaming right in the comfort of your own homes. So we're pretty stoked about the Ferment Fest. But it looks like everything is working well. This is amazing. This is actually incredible.
This is excellent. This is excellent.
Yeah. Well done, everyone. Well, welcome to Calgary Fermentation Festival 2020.
Yeah, right on. We're recording. We are live. We got folks joining us from all over. I see Vancouver. I see Wetaskiwin. I see Delacour, Calgary, Okotoks. Yes. So this is one of the benefits. This is the advantages of being online. We can connect as a much bigger, broader community. It is no longer just about culturing Calgary, culturing the city. It is culturing all these communities around the world. And I just want to say I'm so excited to be here. And this is... what a breath of fresh air. Let's put the news aside. Let's put the US election aside. Let's put COVID aside. Let's just be here. Fermentation, let's get into it. This is one of the most empowering activities that we can get into, not only for our health, individually, personally, which is each of our own responsibility. This is proaction to everything that has been facing us these days. I know it is a lot. I know so many of us are very challenged by what is going on, and this is true power. This is true proaction.
Take it into your own hands, everyone. This is going to be fun. Very practical, and also very informative. We are just beginning to understand fermentation as a humanity. When did we first discover probiotics? Only in the 1970s. So we're actually on the cutting edge of a whole bunch of discoveries for the health of the human body. It's going to be fun and fascinating future, everyone.
Yeah. And what I love about it too, it's like, yes, science is discovering more and more, and sure, our knowledge is going to continue to advance, but really what it comes down to is actually just doing it, creating the ferments yourself with your hands at home with all your love. That is going to make the world of difference. Yes, we can add onto our knowledge and our understanding of what these bacteria are and how they help benefit us. But it's just like the saying in herbalism, the herbs don't work unless you take them. The probiotics, they don't work unless you got them in. It's about building our microbiome, and it's about building community. That's what this festival is about, building our health individually and building our communities of cultures. What we've got going right now, this culture that we are creating right now and that we are going to continue to propagate and spread. This is the probiotic, the pro-life agenda that we want to bring to the world in all its most beautiful, positive sense.
And you're part of it. We want the most diverse range of organisms we've got. So you're part of the culture we're building here. It's going to be fun.
Absolutely.
There's going to be lots of momentum going forward. Maybe one day you're going to be presenting at the Calgary Ferment Fest.
Well, I would say what you take away from these next 2 weeks, do teach another person, share with them what you have learned. There's that saying, the best way to learn something is to teach it. So whatever you learn at this festival, practice it. You don't need to put every single little bit of information, every single recipe into action. That will be a lot. Start with the one or the two that begin to inspire you, catch your attention the most. Put it into action, teach someone else. That is what fermentation and this probiotic culture is all about.
So to usher in the Ferment Fest 2020, we're going to start this first session with the gateway ferment.
And this is what's described as the gateway ferment, the starting place of it all that leads you down the rabbit hole. And very soon, if you're not there already, you're going to have all sorts of science experiments on your kitchen counter, things bubbling away, fermenting away, bringing it to life. And that is through sauerkraut. And just wait, if you're like, oh, I've sauerkraut, been there, done that. I guarantee you, not only will you be entertained by this guy, how can you not be entertained by him? You will be educated. You will pick up on at least one tip that you're like, oh, I never thought about that. I've never done sauerkraut that way. Let me try it this way. How about that?
Yeah, and I guess we're going to explore like the core values of fermentation too. And
core values, core benefits.
What is the real reason that we started fermenting? There's actually lots of good reasons to get started here.
Yeah.
But yeah, just get started with your real fermented sauerkraut. So this is very different from sauerkraut that you can get in the stores that's just using vinegar. This is the actual probiotic sauerkraut. And a lot of people who have told me they do not like sauerkraut, as soon as they try the real fermented stuff, they are sold. So we got to start with a beautiful cabbage.
Yeah.
The first step is going to be to remove a few of the outer leaves. These are going to be very important for a final step in the process.
And if you have a Ukrainian background, you've done cabbage rolls, or you're inspired by that type of cuisine, you're like, I love the idea of cabbage rolls. And, I would actually say take off a few more of those outer leaves, have an actual layer. I've done it where I've taken off, well, I wouldn't say quite half the cabbage, but close to, where you stack in layer after layer of leaf after leaf. And then once the fermentation is done, you can use those leaves as wraps, almost like vine leaves, like creating dolmas or creating those cabbage rolls. Yeah. So as many as you want, you need at least the first couple layers. And here's the thing, this is a nice, beautiful, local, organic cabbage, where there's a number of farmers that we absolutely love in our area and work with. And these are the types of farmers that are building topsoil. And within that topsoil, it's luscious, it's deep, and it's full of probiotics. And that's where we're going to get these bacteria. They're actually on the outside of the skin, the cabbage skin. If I look really close, I can see like a whitish type of film. I know you've seen that on grapes. I know you've seen it on apples and juniper berries and these types of things. This whitish film, that is the bacteria that is covering these leaves that is going to ferment this.
So this is one of the real benefits of starting with these soil-based organisms rather than using a culture to start your kraut.
I mean, there's benefits both ways. When we have Lucas Simmons and Tracy Reed on the Ferment Fest, they're going to be presenting next Wednesday. They're going to be talking about actually one of the benefits of using a starter culture. Even though Denis is going to talk about, not using a starter culture, it's always, know your options, right? Because those starter cultures can have very specific bacteria that you can intentionally add in that you want to cultivate. And if you've ever had reactions to ferments or know somebody, because, one of the things that I love to say is do nothing else, right? Like if you want to improve your diet, or if you want to work with family members to improve their diets, maybe it's your parents, maybe it's your relatives, someone in your family, you can just tell that they need a little love, they need a little magic in their life. Maybe their diet is not the best. The one thing that they can do to absolutely improve their health without doing anything else. Don't even tell them not to eat McDonald's. I mean, you should, if you can have that conversation, but let's just say, that's what they eat, add in fermented foods, live cultured, and their health will improve.
These fermented foods are really foods that are part of our evolution. They're foods that are from our ancestors.
Yeah.
And we've only stopped eating fermented foods recently.
Oh, yeah. Dakota Cohen, who is going to be joining us in this next hour, he's going to give a lot of context to how key they are as a part of the human diet. He's got a saying that the most dangerous invention known to man. Does anybody know what it is? This is the invention that took us way off track from our traditional cultural diets that had cultural foods. He says that one very dangerous invention was the refrigerator.
Yeah, imagine a life without a fridge, without restaurants, without a grocery store. This is how the people lived
without our
in Canada.
Industrial food supply chain, where we got access to, fresh foods 24/7, 365. As much as I love that, bounty and that abundance and that blessing that we have, we need to understand the role that things like ferments play, because I think where, like you said, where we went off was this idea that previously fermentation was essential. We had to ferment if we wanted to preserve the harvest, these big, beautiful cabbages coming out of the field. Or if you've ever seen like the BBC documentary, like The Human Planet, right? There's a migration of birds, and there's this man up north literally grabbing birds out of the air, snapping their necks and throwing them into a seal skin, burying them and letting them ferment, right? It's opportunistic. It is, hey, this is the time, this is the moment, this is the harvest. How do we, preserve and capture that food for a later time? So preservation was essential, and now it's almost like, well, it's optional, but we know it's not optional. We know it is still absolutely essential.
So that's one of the best, most relevant reasons right now to be fermenting. It's food preservation, food security for the future, preserving the harvest for the future. Because once you got a jar of sauerkraut, we give this 3 years for storage, so it's good for a long time.
Totally. So I'm going to go over the 3 conditions that you need to have a safe and friendly ferment when it comes to things like sauerkrauts and pickles. But
the next step,
we'll get there.
The next step, once we've halved our cabbage, is to core them. The heart of the cabbage is surrounded by this very fibrous, it's really fibrous. It's like string in there. So if you add this into your kraut, you're going to get bits that are really hard to chew. So we take the cores out, leaving you with just this part, and then now we have to shred it as fine as we can.
Yeah, we'll come back to the cores and talk about that.
So you could get your friends and your grandma and your auntie to come help you cut.
It's community building. So when I first started,
as fine as you can,
Light Cellar, one of the first workshops I was teaching, and it wasn't even framed as a workshop, it was literally sauerkraut parties. Talk about community building, talk about culture building, get your friends over, get your family over. We'd have groups of 8, 9, 10 people in the kitchen. Everyone had a cutting board and cabbage in front of them, and we'd be chopping and shredding and then salting and massaging. And,
as fine as you can. Chop it as fine as you possibly can to make the next step really easy too.
Yeah.
But we have certain tools at our disposal.
For sure.
This is probably one of the most important things you can get your hands on if you're going to get serious about sauerkrauting and you're going to make 15 liters at a time. This device can literally save you hours and hours of work.
Yeah.
This is called a Kraut board.
Yeah, and consistency as well. You got a nice shred. And what do they say? I know Denis, if you've ever taken classes with him or learned from him through interviews, you're full of lots of great legends and myths and in cultural wisdom. What do they say about the shred of the cabbage?
Yeah, the longer the shred of sauerkraut, the longer you're going to live.
Aha. So make it as long as you can in that regard. So now let me get back to those probiotic bacteria, right? Like that are on the outside of the cabbage, which, by the way, if you just want a little kind of inoculation, you can just lick those bacteria right off. Of course, we're going to culture them. We're going to make them grow and proliferate, but you can get a little head start and just lick the outside of your cabbage. Get inoculated with the good bacteria.
One of the real benefits, of course, of the fermentation process is that this cabbage is getting digested twice. Well, it's getting pre-digested by the bacteria. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you all know what happens when you eat coleslaw, for example.
Yeah.
When you ferment your cabbage, actually, or any food, it makes it tremendously more digestible to us.
Yeah, it does that.
Pretty cool.
And it makes it even more nutritious. So we have higher amounts, more bioavailable nutrients. So for instance, there's more vitamin C in sauerkraut than there is just cabbage. There's more B vitamins, there's more protein, and this goes on and on and on as we analyze each of the ferments that we're going to be making. Yeah.
And it's a total mystery. We still don't understand where that vitamin C comes from. In a cabbage, you have a certain quantity of vitamin C. In the sauerkraut, the final product, that vitamin C is multiplied 300 times, and we don't know where it came from. Where did that vitamin C come from?
Yeah.
No one knows. It's a total mystery.
Yeah, and it's good. You know,
Exciting.
it's nice to still have mystery in life. You know, like ancient cultures that fermented, it was mysterious. Our understanding wasn't so, you know, cut and dry and scientific, which is wonderful to have, but it's also nice to have that mystery. They viewed ferments as literally like as magical foods, right? Like this transformation, there was kind of an awe and an innocence that sometimes I notice we tend to lose in our culture when we come at it from this really kind of clinical, scientific kind of viewpoint. And again, nice to have, but it's also nice to keep that magic and that wonder alive of like, whoa, what is going on? And how does this happen? A total miracle.
Woo, just like that. Look at that though.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Look how fine you get your shreds.
Woo, super fine.
I've picked up some of these old Kraut boards in Alberta in the antique shops because everybody's grandma used to have one of these back in the day. I got mine for $5. But yeah, you can get these kraut shredding, wooden kraut cabbage shredding boards for pretty easily on the internet.
All right. Wow. Short of that, a nice sharp knife, maybe a smaller mandolin. I've definitely worked with things like food processors, but nothing beats the cabbage board. And again, we want to give you everything we possibly can. If you know, in terms of tips, I've been fermenting. I've been doing sauerkraut, like I mentioned, one of the first things within Light Cellar, and over the years, scaling up in terms of equipment. So we went from, you know, hand chopping and food processors to cabbage boards. Next piece of equipment we got, it was this cabbage shredding kind of contraption. You can still get them out there, and it was amazing. It was like a huge upgrade. Yeah. It was through a company called the Sausage Maker. If you want to go that level, maybe you're looking into getting into this commercially. I want to share all that information. So this type of cabbage contraption, you would cut the cabbages in half, and then you'd put it on top of this rotation of blades that had this wheel, and so you'd hold down the cabbage on top of the blades, you crank the wheel, and then it would just do this perfect, beautiful shred. And it was super quick, and we like exponentially just increased our production. I mean, once you start getting into volumes of, you know, 100, 200, 400 pounds of cabbage at a time, like even the board gets a bit tough, monotonous. So this kind of machine was incredible. We went with that for a couple of years, and then we switched to this incredible cabbage shredding machine from Eastern Europe. It was several $1,000s, and it took months to make, and then it got shipped over by boat, and it finally arrived, and we've had it for a couple of years now, and it's incredible. It's the kind of thing where you just put the cabbage in and it goes yeah, so that's what we use today, and it's just like that's really what gives us that nice, beautiful shred.
So at this stage, you could add any vegetables you want in here, right? Carrots, bell peppers. One of the coolest combos is carrot jalapeno kraut, like the combo with the green and the orange together.
So here's my caveat though, is yes, cabbage, not only is it the gateway ferment, allows you to get into this world with comfortability and confidence and inspiration, but it also becomes this delivery system, right? It's like literally you could add anything. You can add herbs, things like nettle leaf. You can add seaweed, sea vegetables, seaweeds like dulse and kelp and nori and wakame, things that maybe you wouldn't necessarily eat every day. Different and unique vegetables like burdock, like radish, like celery root, anything you want can get in there and goes in there. What I personally like to do is salt first, which we'll get to in a moment, show you how that's done, and then I'll add all the veggies and everything afterwards. Okay, yes. So the European shredder, that's this big giant machine.
I think they're literally on Instagram as cabbage shredders.
CabbageShredders.com.
Yeah.
That's where you find this big giant machine, and it's unbelievable. So if you are at that stage, if you want to do commercial production, again, it's a few $1,000s to invest, but it's so worth it. And
some people will use food processors, right?
Yeah, that's kind of the smaller scale of it.
So, okay, now we got our cabbage nicely shredded here.
Yeah.
now is where we're going to turn to our old friend salt.
Yeah.
As old as humanity. So how much you salt your cabbage, there's no real recipe because each head of cabbage is a different weight.
Yeah.
So there is calculators there on the internet. You can like weigh your cabbage, and the density of the cabbage determines how much salt you add.
Well, it's 2%. So you're going to use 2 grams for every 100 grams of cabbage. And you can take that as kind of specific as you want. You can be as flexible as you want. You can go more, you can go less. But 2% is kind of the, the ideal range. Now, that being said, we do not have a scale. We do not even have measuring at all.
But
so
we kind of can eyeball it just from how long we've been doing this. So I'm going to add about, what do you think, Malcolm? 1 tablespoon, 2 tablespoons?
Yeah.
Something in between there.
I do a nice kind of generous covering of salt, just kind of sprinkle that on. And there's always that question, what kind of salt? Any kind of salt that you're inspired about. And I would also consider, utility. So get the highest quality salt that you can at the best value. So what that usually ends up being for me is Himalayan salt. As much as you might like your fine French, ocean salt, or your Celtic salt, or your exotic, Hawaiian salts, go ahead. Generally, I find though that, per pound, those salts are quite a bit more than a rock salt or a Himalayan salt. We've got some great ones from Vancouver Island. Whatever you have, think about kind of the economy of it there. Because generally with these types of ferments, you're going to be using a fair amount.
Do you know the legend, Malcolm, the story of the very first sauerkraut ever?
Oh, let's hear it. Let's hear the origins of sauerkraut.
So long ago, there was a horseman, and he was probably like Mongolian, way back in the day. And before he left, a beautiful woman gave him some cabbage to take with him as a snack. He's like, okay, I'll eat this later. And he stuck the cabbage leaves under his horse's saddle and rode on a long journey. And when he got to his destination, he remembered the cabbage, and the salt of the horse's sweat had transformed the cabbage into sauerkraut.
Not to mention the pounding as he galloped along.
And I guess he liked
on a giant cabbage.
I guess they liked what they tasted, because
the effects.
It lives on to this day.
It is no doubt that a lot of these things were discovered by accident in that regard.
Yeah. So now we begin the process of massaging the cabbage with the salt.
Here's where I prefer to leave. I'll just do the cabbage itself with just salt. And what the process here is with our 2% roughly, by weight as a percentage, what we're aiming for is we want to draw the water out of the cabbage, and salt through the process of osmosis, that's what's going to happen. Oh, excellent. So this is great. Let's get into the troubleshooting. So what happens if, you've added too much salt? Now, dilution is always the solution. You can correct that pre-fermentation, or you can correct it post-fermentation. So you're literally just going to add water. You're going to add water to dilute that out, to make it less salty. And, here at any time, at any stage, you can taste the cabbage, right? It should taste salty, but it shouldn't be like, whoa, oh my God. What we're creating here is something more like a condiment, and we need enough salt, that it's going to draw moisture out of the cabbage, but also it's really going to act as a preservative. It's going to create the favorable environment for the friendly bacteria to grow, but not the bad bacteria. Salt has always been used throughout time as a way to preserve foods. And what we've discovered is that at certain percentages, if we added too much salt, no bacteria could grow, not even the good stuff. So we want to find that nice magic sweet spot. Your palate will let you know, like if it really is like, whoa, way too salty, but you do want to be able to taste the salt. this is one of those things of, sometimes measuring is a good place to start to kind of get it. But, like Denis and I had said, we've been doing this for years. We kind of have this intuitive sense now of how much salt and tasting it.
I'd say for this cabbage, we just add 1.5 or just over 1 tablespoon of salt.
Yeah. So we're going to get into pickling in future sessions, and you can also do it kind of by volume as well. 2-3 tablespoons per liter. And the other thing that you'll notice, if you don't have enough salt, this is going to take a long time to be able to activate the cabbage, draw out the moisture. So why don't you pick that up and give folks a look of where you're at so far.
We're starting to get some juices. Yeah. Essentially, we want to massage this until when we press the kraut into our ferment pot here, we're going to be able to submerge it under all the juices. When we press it down really hard, those juices will rise up.
So that leads us to the second condition that we need to create a safe and friendly ferment. And that's an anaerobic environment. We need it submerged in that brine, that 2% brine solution of salt and water. And it's water at this stage just purely from the cabbage. You can always add water, and I'll get to that in a sec, but we need it in an anaerobic environment. Really good question. So my preference is to not use iodized salt. I prefer natural salts. If someone's looking to get iodine, I would get it from sea vegetables. If that's a concern and you're looking for more iodine, look for natural sources versus something that's been added. I find that a lot of iodized salts, it's refined salt, it's sodium chloride and iodine versus natural salts from the ocean, from the earth, that have a more full spectrum of minerals versus just 3. Yeah. Okay, keep those questions coming. Absolutely. And let me get back to if you have too much salt, if it's too salty, right? So we have enough juice here that when we pack it into our vessel, whatever we're using, we want to press it down and have everything submerged underneath that liquid. You can add extra liquid if you need, and that's where you can add water if you feel it's too salty. Or maybe you just go for it. You've made your sauerkraut. You taste it like, it's a little too salty. You can dilute it. You can add extra water. And then maybe you did 3% or you're even at 4% salt solution. By adding liquid, it'll help dilute it, but you'll still be within that safe range of the roughly 2%.
I guess in the old days, hey, Malcolm, they used to hop on the sauerkraut just like they crushed wines. They would crush it with their feet.
So here we are. We're only tackling one cabbage. Very, very easy, very manageable to deal with.
It shrunk down quite a bit. I thought we would have a lot more.
Yeah. So if you have huge volumes of cabbage, again, those sauerkraut parties back in the day, everyone would be at their station. They'd have their bowl and we'd be working it away for, 10, 15, 20, 25 minutes, just massaging bowl after bowl after bowl. And by the end, it's like, whew, your forearms were just throbbing. And if anybody knows Daniel Vitalis, he'd visited us. He's been to Calgary a couple times actually over the years and done talks with us. And we hosted him and we were doing a session and he was teaching this method and I was demonstrating and I was up there just like massaging away, kind of like Denis is here. And all of a sudden he turns over and he says, you can just leave it, by the way.
Yeah.
You can salt it, you can mix it around and just leave
Come back later.
In fact, the salt will do the work for you. I mean, it's nice to kind of massage it, put your love into it, but you don't need to tire yourself out, especially if it's just you and you've got 50 cabbages or even 10 cabbages that you're processing. It's nice to be able to just kind of, mix it and then the salt will do the work. The longer you let it sit, the more it's going to draw that moisture out. And as Denis mentioned, families probably would have got right in there into the barrel, like stomping it down, or you can get like pounders to just kind of hammer at the cabbage and mush it down and get it mixed with the salt.
So today, now is a chance. Now we get the chance to add some cool ingredients. So Malcolm, what have we got here in this little bowl?
All right. What do we have here? I don't know.
This is honestly one of my favorite herbs and medicinal ingredients there is on the planet. This is dill, really nice dill weed. And this is going to add it actually tastes good, right? Everyone loves dill.
Yeah.
The other benefit we're getting here dill is one of the most incredibly important digestive herbs. So we're getting like a gut healing double whammy. We get the probiotic benefits, and then we get the herbal benefits of the dill, a circulatory stimulant to the digestive system, yet without being a warming herb. Like ginger and garlic and chilies are all warming, but dill is actually cooling. So it can be really good for those people that are sensitive to hot things.
Yeah, or just naturally running hot internally.
So I'm loading it because I love dill.
And a great, summertime herb as well. Like it's the idea of like, dill at picnics, dill pickles, relish, this kind of thing. As you say, it is cooling versus more heat.
So we get the healing benefit of the dill. We get the healing benefit of the fermentation.
Oh, and the flavors. Delicious.
Yeah, my mouth is watering right now. And we're also getting the healing benefit of the cabbage. So in fermentation, all the different vegetables have healing properties, but cabbage is especially rich in sulfur, sulfur compounds. And these are actually one of the reasons sauerkraut is so healing. When the human body is actually, sulfur is one of the hardest things to get enough of. But the sulfur is used by the body for all sorts of things, healthy connective tissue, knees and joints.
Yeah, detoxification.
But also detoxification. It's very fascinating. There was a study done on sauerkraut and it was a study done on these lobster fishermen. And they took two groups of lobster fishermen. Of course, lobsters are one of the richest sources of mercury, right? Heavy metal poisoning.
Right.
And so one group of lobster fishermen over a month ate sauerkraut every day. And the other group, they didn't have any sauerkraut. At the end of the study, the group that ate sauerkraut every day had little or no detectable mercury in their bodies, where the lobster fishermen that didn't eat the sauerkraut had elevated levels of mercury, which... And I guess people go crazy, hey, Malcolm. I'm not sure what...
The Mad Hatter.
Yeah, they might go a little bit crazy.
Right? That's the origin of the Mad Hatter, where they used to use mercury in the making of those hats. And it definitely affects the brain. So we know in this day and age, we're living in a world where there is just a natural fact of life, pollution in the oceans, pollution in the air, pollution in our soils. And it is things like the bacterias that are our allies.
Yeah. So there's two things going on. One, the sauerkraut was helping with elimination. So these fishermen were moving. They're, you know what I mean?
They're having some good movements.
Yeah, the movement. And the other reason is this richness of sulfur compounds, which the liver needs them to detoxify certain things. It's a process called methylation. So the liver needs the sulfur compound to bind to the toxin to be able to eliminate it. But it's so cool.
Yeah.
So I thought we were going to need a big crock for our cabbage today, but looks like it shrunk down enough to fit into a jar. So I'm actually pleased about this because making sauerkraut, you don't need the fancy equipment. You can literally make this in a jar at home. This is really helpful if you want to scale up though.
Yeah.
So next step, we got our nice, really rich in dill sauerkraut.
Well, cabbage still. It's not kraut yet.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So as Denis puts it in the jar, real key is that he's going to want to pack it down as he begins to add those layers. We want to get rid of any kind of air pockets. We don't want any oxygen in there. We want that anaerobic environment. And that's going to be achieved by packing it down and letting those juices come to the surface. And we want all that cabbage submerged under there.
Yeah, I hope everyone can see.
Again, you can add more water if you want, if you need, if it's kind of diluting because it's too salty, but also if you have room, you might as well. So one of the things that we started doing here at Light Cellar was years ago, we were making the sauerkraut and we had a naturopath contact us. And she says, Malcolm, I work with a ton of patients that have, compromised digestion. And I mean, actually, in fact, I have a whole spectrum of clients, and I send them all to, get your sauerkraut, because it's one of the only live cultured ones on the market that I love and I trust. But for those of my clients that are severely compromised with their digestion, even that, is still too much for them. But you know what works amazing is the brine. And she says, would you consider making brine and selling us the brine? And so that began this kind of venture, this journey of creating brine and providing that. And it is literally one of the most powerful, amazing healing foods that is probably the cheapest thing we sell in that regard, because how it's created in this exact same process, you can see we've got some headroom here. That's all the room that the cabbage is taking, but we have more room in this vessel. So now what we can do is we can fill up with water, and then at the end of the fermentation, we've got all this extra brine that can be available and used as a tonic. And I've heard so many stories about how people have used the tonic.
We're probably going to learn a lot more about that with Megan Barefoot tomorrow night. She's doing the gut and psychology syndrome.
Yes.
And yeah, if your gut is really messed up, yeah, it's best to start with just the brine of fermented food.
That's right. And that reminds me, we started talking about these natural bacteria that are on the cabbage skin that are literally going to be responsible for turning this cabbage into sauerkraut. Now,
okay, can everyone see how this is what you want to have the brine? You see how the brine is rising above all the vegetables?
Yeah.
Basically, as this ferments, everything under the brine will be fine. So
that's right. That's your motto. Everything under the brine is fine.
The next step, we're going to build the cap of cabbage leaves.
Yes.
And it's really important to do this because it's going to keep all the little bits of cabbage from rising to the surface. It's anything that is on the surface of the brine that can potentially go moldy.
Yeah. So one of the things that, you might encounter if you do not get a good air seal, because we want an anaerobic environment, is sometimes you might see a little bit of a surface mold, like a white skim on top. And your motto for this is keep calm. It's only cam. It is just what's called cam yeast. It's harmless. It's odorless. And, it looks a bit unsightly, especially for brand new people. You're like, oh my gosh, I ruined it. It's spoiled. No, it's just surface. And it can be skimmed right off, and you won't be able to get 100% of it. So you just mix it in. Not a big deal.
Everything under the brine is fine.
Everything under the brine is fine. Yeah. Okay. Questions coming in? Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. So the question is, can we talk a little bit about more tap water? Now, I have to admit, I'm a bit of a water snob, less so than I was originally, where for years, would only drink, pure spring water straight out of the ground for all my cooking, all my drinking, everything, because really had a kind of negative view of tap water. And it took a little bit of traveling. It took going to places like Los Angeles or Florida, Vegas, and drinking their tap water, going, oh my gosh, like you can't even get the cup near your nose. It smells so bad. So we have beautiful tap water here in Calgary. I really do. I must praise it. And I will still prefer to filter it, right? So chlorine plays a wonderful function in that it is basically like a sterilite, like a antibacterial agent to be able to kind of sterilize our water as it travels through the pipes and makes its way to us. It's a wonderful thing, but it is best to filter it. And even if you take, water and you let it sit out overnight, if you don't have a filter, let it evaporate off at the very least, because the very nature of chlorine in terms of it, killing bacteria, it doesn't just stop once it comes out of the tap. It continues on. So there's a saying, get a filter or become the filter in that sense. You'll absorb some of that chlorine, it'll affect some of your microbiome. And if we put it straight into a ferment, I won't say it's not going to kill it, but it will hinder it. So, filtered water is best to just remove the chlorine.
Okay, so I added a little bit extra water to get a nice shot of brine afterwards. The hangover cure, by the way.
Yeah.
As well as the cure for any sore throat. Just gargle this probiotic juice.
Yeah.
And it works wonderfully. I think it's because the probiotic bacteria are antibacterial.
They are.
They're top predators of the food world, and they'll actually combat the bacteria that's giving you a sore throat.
For sure.
Very effective, as well as the saltiness.
The salt as well. Yeah. So many remedies, that you can utilize a little bit of brine for. And that's why we describe it as like liquid gold. So whether you're making pickles, whether you're making sauerkraut, add extra liquid anytime you can. So you have extra brine that's full of these probiotic bacteria.
So now we're going to weigh everything down. You could just use a jar inside of a jar. That's one of my favorite methods.
Yeah.
But we got these fancy, beautiful fermenting stones.
Yeah. So they're called pickle pebbles. You can use rocks. If you get one of these fermentation pots, they'll often come with ceramic weights that will be able to hold things down as well.
Yeah.
And this is the idea that we want that anaerobic environment. So again, even though Denis packed this down, what generally tends to happen is your cabbage is going to begin to kind of float to the surface, right? And if it does, then it'll become exposed to the air. Now it's an aerobic environment. Now you're going to get negative bacteria, bad bacteria that you don't necessarily want.
So we got our beautiful stone in there. It's going to keep everything under the brine. Now we're going to loosely seal the jar. You do not want to seal your jar completely because of the gases produced in fermentation. So if you're using a mason jar, just put the lid on very loosely so that the gases can still escape. This one, I'm not going to put the rubber gasket on.
Yeah, it's basically just prevent anything getting in, but we still want those gases to release. When I did one of those fermentation parties way back in the day, there was a woman that was invited, a friend of hers. English was a second language. Everyone made their kraut. And of course, to take their kraut home, they sealed up the jar, took it home for the travel so it didn't spill everywhere. Well, she didn't quite hear or didn't understand that when she got home, she wanted to then loosen those mason jars. Ooh. And so she put her 2 jars of sauerkraut, tightly sealed up into the basement. And within a couple of weeks, they both exploded. So it was glass and cabbage everywhere. Not a good scene.
So you also want to keep it in a bowl because often this is going to get so excited, it's going to bubble over with excitement, literally. And this can cause a terrible mess, especially if you're using beets in your mom's cupboard. and it foams right over. So always keep it in a bowl.
And I'd recommend, all your vessels should be ceramic or glass. We're just grabbing a metal bowl right now, but ideally you have it in a non-metal container, because those liquids, what's going to happen is right now we've got a nice saline solution, right? It's salt and cabbage. And that brings us to the third condition that we want to have that is going to be created through fermentation. That's going to create a safe and friendly ferment. So to just kind of recap, we want 2% brine, salt. We want anaerobic environment. And we want an acidic environment. We want an acid pH. And that's going to happen as this begins to ferment. Through the process of fermentation, it'll drop the pH, the pH. And it's fascinating. They've studied, there's a succession of bacteria, right? So the bacteria that are starting off of the cabbage that have, gone in from Denis' hands and from the air are now in there, and they're going to start to break down those fibers, digest the sugars. They're releasing things like carbon dioxide, but they're also releasing beneficial acids, things like lactic acid. Yeah.
And it's called lactic acid fermentation, and it has nothing to do with dairy. It's because we discovered these bacteria in yogurt that we call them lactobacillus. But yeah, there's a lacto fermentation, nothing to do with milk.
Yeah. Okay, another question.
Do you suggest using pickle types for
Yes. So there are so many inventions out there that you can help utilize your fermentation to create those right environments. The anaerobic environment, there's something called a pickle pipe. We carry those here at Light Cellar, and they fit right onto either a regular mouth mason jar or a wide mouth mason jar. And they let the gases release. It's almost like the top of a baby bottle where there's a little hole and there's that back pressure, that
an airlock system,
airlock. Yeah, it's moving the gases out, but nothing can get in, and they're called pickle pipes.
One real advantage, especially in Calgary, with that is that you do not get evaporation of the brine.
Yes.
So in Calgary, be careful, because over time your brine can evaporate, and all you have to do is keep an eye on it, add some water if that happens. But if the brine evaporates down, exposing the vegetables, you're going to have some serious oxidation occur,
some mold,
and funk.
Yeah,
you'll get a funky.
Okay, I should share a quick story about that.
All right.
So this one time, it was earlier days, community fermentation parties. One of us, a friend, had invested in one of these incredible crocks and ceramic, and they have these airlocks built in so that when you put the lid on, it has this moat that you then just fill the inside with water, and it creates this air seal. So we did that. We put in the water into the moat. Great. Awesome. It's sealed. We put it down into a friend's basement, and we're like, great, we're going to come back in 4, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, however long, we'll check on it, and it's going to be all good. Well, it's Calgary. It's dry. Even if you're probably on the coast, it would still happen. That evaporation, all the liquid had gone that had created that air seal. We didn't get to it in 4 weeks, 6 weeks. It was at least 8, maybe 9. Life got busy. It was a while till we could all get ourselves back together again and have this Kraut unveiling. So we went down into, Buddy's basement. We found the crock. We're like, oh, what happened to our water there? It had evaporated. We brought the crock up, and it was this grand unveiling that quickly turned to a horror show where we looked in, and literally just the smell, the stench, the lid went back on. It was like, it was a total disaster because that evaporation had occurred. The brine had gone down. Now things were exposed to the air. Things began to mold. And it was not a good thing. So we just took it out to the compost. We started unloading this nasty, rotten kraut. But what happened, what surprised us, is that as we got about halfway down, suddenly it didn't look so bad. Suddenly it wasn't so nasty of a smell. And then it became this challenge of, okay, you try some first, see if it's still good. And sure enough, 1, 2, 3, all at the same time. We had a little bite, and it was like, wow, okay, actually, this is pretty good. So even though the top had gone off because it had been exposed to air, so we didn't have that anaerobic environment, everything that was still underneath, under the brine, was actually still pretty good. So we saved half of our batch. Now, my only caveat there is if you are immune compromised, if you have sensitive digestion or histamine issues, what Luca and Tracy are going to talk about, I wouldn't recommend that for everybody to do that. But always follow your nose, trust your gut in that sense. And for most of us, you can salvage. Even if you get that surface mold, again, that white thin layer, keep calm. It's only CAM. You can skim that off. That's harmless. But if it begins to look a little bit fuzzy, if it's looking a little black, if it's really stinking stench, because you can visibly see it, something went wrong, then maybe it's time for the compost. But
I've noticed that it's good to keep it in a cool place as well.
Right.
When it's too warm, one person put it on top of their refrigerator.
Right.
And that's when it got yeasty. But mine, I keep it in a cool place in my house, room temperature it likes it. So
this is the idea of where the Koreans would have they'd bury their kimchi pot under the ground and have that nice constant temperature. So you don't want it too cold because it'll take too long. It'll slow it down. Or if it's too warm, it'll be too fast. So what other questions do we got? Oh, that's all for now.
I guess we're doing a good job. I guess we're doing too good of a job, Malcolm, if people don't have any questions. But it's okay. We're going to be answering questions all night in this group for the whole festival. You can get questions answered by us. Oh,
really great question. Any concerns for fermented foods for pregnancy and breastfeeding. So the only one that I can think of is one that Denis and I are doing next week, which is the mead making,
fermenting alcoholic
fermenting
beverage.
into alcohol. Now that's not going to happen with things like lacto-fermented vegetables or dairy or meat. All of those would be 100% safe.
Follow your cravings, right? I know apparently pregnant ladies love dill pickles, and they're gonna probably crave this sauerkraut.
Yeah, and in fact, you know, when we start talking about children, babies, you know, it's one of the best first foods. So my son,
apparently, if you put all these different foods in front of an infant, they will eat the sauerkraut first.
And if you can get them, get their palate used to the taste of sour, there's going to be less of a craving and a dependency on things like sugar and sweet flavors later on in life. So it's incredibly beneficial, useful, and I would highly recommend it as baby's first foods, if not the first one within the top 2, 3, 4, 5 foods that you begin to introduce. And it's not like it's like, you know, they'll. I mean, my son, he played with the sauerkraut. We started with a bit of brine, you know, dip your little finger in there and, you know, feed them like a bird kind of thing, just to get that taste and just think about that microbiome that's being set up now by the introduction of these types of live cultured ferments.
Okay, another question? To prevent that from happening, if you have fruit flies.
Let me repeat the question. Yeah, so fruit flies, what if you get that?
Oh, yeah. If you have fruit flies in your house, just cover the top of your ferment with a cheesecloth or a linen towel with an elastic, and they can't get in there. I'd scoop them out.
Yeah, scoop them as best you can. Otherwise, just extra protein in that regard.
Not
going to harm you, not going to kill you.
And they can definitely not get in if you have like a water moat.
Yeah. Those pickle pipes, it won't happen. You know, these types of ceramic pots won't happen. Ooh, okay. So flavoring, anything goes.
Sky's the limit.
Sky is the limit. So be creative. We mentioned things like herbs. You know, the one
juniper, caraway, black pepper, garlic.
Yeah.
Anything you can imagine.
One of my favorites that we've done here for years is the curried mango and green raisin. Amazing, right?
Yeah.
You know, look at different spice blends that you have. And I just want to emphasize, you know, get your cabbage ready, chop it, salt it, massage it, and then add your vegetables, then add your herbs, then add your spices, especially the hot spices. So
you don't you're not massaging the chili peppers too much into your arms.
Yes, I learned that the hard way. Actually, in fact, it was more Madeline that learned that the hard way. We were doing our Kraut making. This is back at the old location, you know, big bowls. We're going for like the hottest kimchi we possibly could. We had fresh chilies, dried chilies, whole chilies, powdered chilies. You know, it was cabbage, salt, everything went in, the chilies. We start massaging, and I look over at Madeline, and she's like red here. Her arms were inflamed, and it was a bad scene. So
and be careful later on in the night in the bed chamber if you've been handling that stuff. If you don't want a surprise.
So the best mode of operation there is when you have the heat, the hot chilies, is then you're going to layer it. As you're putting in your cabbage, then you might just sprinkle in your chopped chilies. Koreans, they wear the gloves, the kimchi gloves. And that's literally just dishwashing gloves that they'll put on as they toss it.
I would say we could challenge you to come up with an ingredient for sauerkraut that would not be tasty.
So I got one. Do you remember this? We did this one time. We did like the traditional Chinese tonic herb sauerkraut, where we put in like
the goji berries,
gojis and schizandra and ginseng, and it's like it sounded great, but it was like, it wasn't so good.
It's funny because I liked that one a lot.
Okay.
It's funny because I really liked that one.
Yeah. So
it's to each your own, right?
Okay, and here's one of our other like super hot tips. We'll keep getting to questions. So let's say you've invested in one of these beautiful crocks. I mean, this one, you got from an artisan.
Yeah. Highland ceramic. She's sweet.
Cool.
Put her on I'm going to put her Instagram up later.
Yeah. No, we've got some beautiful ones in the shop that are from Poland. We brought them in from Germany, different places in Eastern Europe. And they're a bit more of an investment, you know, a couple $100, but they're very good, and you can get them in different sizes. And this is one of the things, that journey that we went through of scaling up. We had 5 liter, 10 liter, 15 liter, 20 liter. And it was like, we had too many of them. We're like, we need more room. So we went to 40 liters. And at that point, they start to get really, really huge and heavy. I love fermenting in the ceramic pots. It's a beautiful energy. But once you get above to like 40 liters, it just does get overwhelming. So then we move to giant stainless steel vats where we can do like 300 pounds, 350 pounds of cabbage. And these are the, you know, kind of surgical steel grade. They don't rust. It's what they ferment wine in, that type of thing. But we still have all our ceramic pots. And especially as an individual, if you're at home and you've got a 15 liter pot that you're fermenting in, one of my best recommendations is ferment plain cabbage, 15 liters or 10 or 5 or whatever it is. And then once you jar it, then you flavor it as you jar it. Now, that way you can have 15 1-liter jars, all a different flavor, or 5, 5, and 5. And then you can try those experimental ones, right? Like, imagine if I'd only done.
I might be trying a chlorella one here pretty soon.
Chlorella, right?
I've
Why
never
not?
tried that.
Right. So as you try it, you know, do a plain batch and then experiment instead of 15 liters all in with chlorella Kraut. It may not be good.
Yeah.
Oh, what is the name for the pot? Oh, the ceramicist?
Oh, yeah. I'll put the link in after. I think it's Highland Ceramics. I'll put a link in the conversation after the show.
I will say there's more and more artisans making these. So, oh, good question. Can you do it salt-free? It's a tough one. So my recommendation is, so you do need the salt. It is a key ingredient in terms of the fermentation process to create that safe and friendly ferment. You can try to lower the salt, you know, 1.5% solution. You can also use sea vegetables, which are kind of broader spectrum of more than just sodium.
It's a very controversial subject in fermentation. It turns out, so the Japanese eat a ton of salt. And the thing is, it's not in the same form we eat it in. When the salt is in the form of this ferment, it transforms. When you're eating the salt in a crystal form like this, it's a different action in the body. But the question is, how come the Japanese diet is so high in sodium, yet their heart disease is a fraction of North Americans? The answer is that it's not the salt that's the problem.
Right.
It's that's a whole other subject.
Yeah. And you're going to be using this sauerkraut and other fermented products that are salt-based as a condiment, right? So you can balance that out as you're doing your cooking by adding a ferment instead of adding a salt. So
I'd be more concerned about vegetable oils. Get the canola, soy, corn. Get those vegetable oils out of your diet. But okay, we've got 1 minute till Dakota.
Yeah.
We have 1 minute till our next presentation.
But we got a couple more questions. Let's keep going. Oh, yeah. Really good question. So when you start looking at recipes, I know early days, a lot of them call for a whey, right? From dairy, from cheese making, from straining yogurts, and it'll often call for adding whey. Now, I say no way. You don't need to add whey. You can if you want. In all the years, 15 years that I've been doing these ferments, even more, 16 years, I've only added whey once just to try it. Like, maybe I'll try that. And I've only ever added a specific culture once. I typically rely on the bacteria, that's the wild bacteria that's from the cabbage, from the soil, from the air. That's what I ferment with. Now, sometimes there's argues about, it's beneficial, or as Luca and Tracy will be talking about on Wednesday with the histamine issues, when you add a specific culture, and this wouldn't apply to whey, but you can choose selective bacteria, and they're going to be talking about this idea of histamines, and there's certain strains that don't produce the histamines, and so they will intentionally add bacteria for that end result. The whey, I think it's unnecessary. It does help, by initially adding bacteria. It initially adds that acidic environment, but it can also happen perfectly just as is.
Well, as we see, this subject is profound.
Yeah.
There's so much to talk about. So,
and there's no right, no wrong.
We're
It's
gonna be
maker's choice.
Oh.
Okay, when's the best time to eat sauerkraut?
Anytime.
Whenever it calls you.
On your...
Let me ask, have you ever had sauerkraut for breakfast?
Oh, yeah, with a little bit of honey.
Yeah.
A little bit of honey on your kraut and a little bit of pumpkin seeds to give it crunch.
Yeah.
But the honey balances the sourness, and it's a great way to get kids to eat the kraut. It's a harmony of flavors, sweet and sour together.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, good question.
Oh, right in these ceramic things.
Yeah. So when you're burying, if you're going to go the whole Korean style inspiration and you want to bury your ferment, I mean, most of us, we're going to probably put it in the basement, places like that, the root cellar. But yeah, then a ceramic pot would be best. I mean, glass would still work in terms of putting it straight into the ground.
Okay, well, what a good way to usher in the first episode of the 2020 Ferment Fest.
Yeah.
We're going to be continuing this discussion. This is going to be a real fermentation. We're going to be continuing to have conversations about this for...
Totally. So whether you're on the Facebook group or you're on Zoom, just keep plugging in your questions. We'll keep answering them both tonight as well as throughout the week and next week. And we're going to need to bring on to